Nation to Nation, Senator Kim Pate discusses the need for a guaranteed livable income.
People get housed, they get fed, and they get out of poverty faster, they get out of homelessness faster.
Democracy Watch slams the RCMP for its investigation into the SNC-Lavalin scandal 4 years ago.
The RCMP rolled over like a negligently weak lapdog. They did a very superficial investigation, only talked to 3 people.
And the University of Toronto officially launches a free tuition initiative to 9 First Nation communities in Ontario.
We really wanted to do something that was a real concrete action, and I think this has been one of those real concrete actions to really show something significant.
Ani, hello, welcome to Nation. I'm Annette Francis. No one would argue we're in hard times when it comes to finances. It's tough to budget with the cost of keeping a roof over your head, food in your belly, and bills to pay. That's why Senator Kim Pate sponsored Bill S-233, which proposes the development of a national framework for guaranteed livable basic income. It's currently being studied by the Senate Finance Committee. If passed, it would require Canada's finance minister to develop a national framework for implementing a guaranteed livable basic income program. Senator Kim Pate joins us now. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you. It's wonderful to join you from here on the shores of the Kitchissippi in the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe.
What exactly is a guaranteed livable income, and how is it different from welfare?
So one of the big reasons that I introduced a bill to talk about this is to say we should have the discussion about what kind of model we should look at. So first of all, that's what the bill does. It doesn't actually say we'll have a guaranteed livable income, even though personally I would like to start there. But what we're talking about is basically an income that goes out to folks when they need it, whether it's because they're sick, because they can't work, because they're wanting to train to get a better job or to go to school. And that it doesn't have the same moralistic approach that social assistance does right now, or welfare, where you have to prove that you're entitled to it, you have to prove that you deserve it, you have to test every piece. It's basically saying that if you're under a certain income, then you should be entitled to have these resources. We know that everywhere that it has been tried, it has both saved money and allowed people to rebound out of poverty. And so we're also talking about livable. So when I say guaranteed livable, I mean not what social assistance is right now, because in every province and territory in this country, the amount of money provided on social assistance is not livable. You can't survive on it. And so it makes everybody what I call infinitely criminalizable, that people are doing things that if they were monitored, if they were followed, if they were prosecuted, could end up criminalized for, and that's wrong. That's really, shows the stigma and the attitudes that basically are about being against poor people. And what we know from Dr. Zhao, who testified at the Senate committee about Bill S-233, is that when you actually provide money to people who are living in poverty, guess what? They spend it in their communities. They pay rent, they buy food, they clothe themselves, they maybe get stuff for their kids. But contrary to the myths and the stereotypes that are out there, predominantly, held by people with money, quite frankly, who have never been, in a situation where they're poor or struggling to make ends meet, is that somehow if you give money to poor people, that they'll waste it. And what her research shows that, in fact, when you provide more resources, enough for people to live on, 2 main things happen. People get housed, they get fed, and they get out of poverty faster, they get out of homelessness faster, and they're less likely to spend money on things like drugs and alcohol.
How much would a program like this cost?
All right. So it depends on the model, and the parliamentary budget officer also testified and said that the net cost, so after taking into account the savings for other services, and this is not including long-term, would probably cost about $3 billion. The overall price tag is closer to 70 or 75 billion. But when you take into account, things like what is spent now on social assistance, what is spent on some of the other types of approaches that could be looked at, then you could actually reduce the cost. And then what the parliamentary budget officer also said is what they didn't do is look at the long-term cost savings that undoubtedly there would be. We saw in the Mincome project in Manitoba that there were cost savings in terms of the criminal system, the prison system, the healthcare system, because people were eating better, they had a standard of living that was better, they were less likely to get sick, and they were less likely to use emergency rooms. And so we know that down the line, this type of approach not just makes sense in terms of being better for people, taking care of people better, but makes fiscal sense. It's financially more viable and actually leaves people in a better place than our current systems and costs less.
But that same program that was in Dolphin, Manitoba in the 70s. It was scrapped in 79, largely due to economic turmoil that meant more families needed it. How does something like that not happen again on a larger scale where it's discontinued all of a sudden?
Well, that's one of the reasons that many of the advocates that we've consulted with have suggested that we roll out some initiatives in a few places in this country, not just one. And that much like Medicare, the way Medicare started, where first Saskatchewan started doing it, and once people started to see the benefits, even though, yes, there were costs to it, the longer term benefits people signed on to, and nobody wanted to cut it once they started to see the benefits. In this case, when you start with a small group and only do it incrementally, which is what we've already done really in Canada with the Canada Child Benefit, with a guaranteed income supplement for seniors, and now we're going to have a disability benefit. And the obvious question is, why are we still leaving some people out? The BC group that looked at this, as well as in Quebec, they said, let's essentially do it incrementally. Let's target certain groups. And that has a certain appeal until you realize, okay, who does that leave out? Well, guess what? It leaves out a lot of Indigenous people. It leaves out a lot of people who are struggling right now on social assistance.
Changing topics, you also sit on the Senate committee looking closely at the bail reform bill. Indigenous lawyer Krista Big Canoe testified before that committee last month. She said what the bill does is it will result in more Indigenous women behind bars. How has the Senate responded to that criticism?
Well, as you may know, I was, aside from the government leader and the critic on the bill, the Conservative critic, I was the only other person who spoke in the Senate at second reading on the bill and encouraged us not to pass it. I'm not going to vote in favor of the bill. In fact, I'm just headed right after this back into legal committee. And last night it passed clause by clause. So that means it's going to go back to the Senate for third reading. But we included amendments to try and reverse some of the most egregious parts of the bill. My personal view is it still shouldn't pass. It shouldn't see the light of day. That yes, Krista Big Canoe is and many other witnesses are absolutely right. That we know that this will likely result in not the people who committed the horrible offenses that actually generated this bill, that gave rise to the Premier's writing to then Minister of Justice Lametti and asking for it. But instead, it will result in many, many more people being ensnared in the system and make it harder for them to get out on bail, harder for them to, and therefore also more likely to end up in prison, because once you're in there and that, it's often a fast track in. And yet we know that the majority of those folks, and somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 49 to 50%, may not even be found guilty. But when we're talking about Indigenous people and Indigenous women in particular, we know they're also more likely to plead guilty, because if they get held on bail and there's a potential for them to lose their kids, to lose their housing, and potentially lose jobs, lose basically everything, then oftentimes they're encouraged to plead guilty to get it over with.
Miigwech for that. Thank you, Senator Pate.
Thank you to you too, and thanks for all your work at APTN, all of you.
After the break, Duff Coniker of Democracy Watch slams the RCMP over the SNC-Lavalin investigation. Honey, welcome back. The SNC-Lavalin scandal seems like it was ages ago, but Democracy Watch reminded people about it earlier this week. The organization is a watchdog on government accountability, and on Monday it released 1,800 pages of material gathered through access to information. The record centered on the RCMP investigation of Prime Minister Trudeau and cabinet officials on whether they pressured then Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to stop a prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. The scandal led to Wilson-Raybould eventually being expelled by the Liberal Party. Democracy Watch co-founder Duff Coniker joins us now. Welcome, Mr. Coniker.
Thank you.
First of all, why did you make these access to information requests?
Well, what should happen in a case like this where politicians, government officials are involved in a questionable situation that raises questions about whether the criminal code has been violated is that a special prosecutor should be overseeing the investigation by the RCMP and should, at the end of the investigation, issue a public report as to the details of the investigation. And if someone's prosecuted, then obviously that goes to court. But if no one's being prosecuted, then explaining why not. And in this case, the RCMP has not made a statement since September 2019, so almost 4 years have passed. Lots of questions raised about what's going on, secrecy from them, and so we had to dig in and find out what happened, because you can't just let these things go away secretly. That's just not in the public interest in any way.
Based on all this evidence, how would you characterize the investigation the RCMP conducted?
The RCMP rolled over like a negligently weak lapdog. They did a very superficial investigation, only talked to 3 people, reviewed public documents and the testimony that the ethics commissioner had obtained in his report finding Prime Minister Trudeau guilty of violating the federal ethics law. Didn't go further, didn't try to go to court to get a search warrant to get these secret cabinet documents that the Trudeau cabinet was refusing to give them. And then took more than a year to respond to our access to information request, which is a violation of the federal open government law.
You've asked for a public inquiry into the way the RCMP investigated the scandal. What would that accomplish?
Well, it would get answers to 5 key questions. First of all, part of the 4-year period that's gone on with radio silence from the RCMP was a 2-year delay. The RCMP received an assessment report from its investigating officer. The top officers then didn't do anything for almost 2 years. Why? Who made the decision not to prosecute anyone? Did they communicate with the Trudeau cabinet at all, or anyone in the government when making that decision? We're still chasing after more than 2,200 pages of documents that the RCMP still has not released. And why didn't they go to court to try and get those secret cabinet communications, which are needed to determine what actually happened and determine whether the intent was to help SNC-Lavalin by stopping their prosecution? So these are very key questions to answer in the interest of government ethics, police ethics, transparency, accountability, and also independence of the RCMP from political interference.
The scandal probably seems like a distant memory to most Canadians. Why should they care at this point?
Well, they should care because if the RCMP are not enforcing anti-corruption laws in a fair and effective way, but instead are enforcing them in a political way, then that undermines law enforcement at the top levels and government accountability at the top levels, and really undermines our democracy entirely. It's really the Canadian way that if when you look historically, if someone is found guilty, like Trudeau was, of violating the ethics law, then often the RCMP just walks away and doesn't do its job properly to determine whether a crime has occurred. Or if someone resigns their office or retires, they get to walk away. And we can't let people walk away for serious wrongdoing. and let the RCMP just bury it and cover it up with secrecy and delay. That just can't be how things work. Or if that's the way it works, we're not a democracy.
Do you think we'll ever find out why no one was prosecuted?
Well, a Conservative MP, Michael Barrett, has proposed to the House Ethics Committee a motion to have 4 hearings into the issue. That's not a full public inquiry, but they would at least be able to call the Prime Minister, other cabinet officials, and the RCMP and ask them, RCMP, why didn't you ask a judge for a search warrant? At least try. Maybe the judge would not give you the search warrant, but not trying at all is just rolling over like a lapdog. And ask the cabinet ministers and officials and Prime Minister, why didn't you allow the RCMP to look at cabinet confidences and the key communications on this issue?
Mm-hmm. Does all this information support some Indigenous people's feelings that former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould was mistreated through this scandal?
I think so, yes. The RCMP looked at what the cabinet officials said. Prime Minister Trudeau, his staff, Finance Minister and his staff, and others from the Privy Council office, the clerk's office, and they just accepted it at face value, that she wasn't being pressured, she wasn't being interfered with, that they were just trying to ask questions and make suggestions, and that the cabinet shuffle that happened afterwards, where she decided not to take another post but instead to resign, and essentially feeling like she was pushed out, that cabinet shuffle had good reasons. They just accepted everyone at face value, when in fact, you'd have to look at all the communications, emails, phone logs, texting, to find out what their real reasons were for doing all of this. And the RCMP, again, didn't even try to get those communications, just accepted everything the Trudeau cabinet said, and also cast it in a favorable light in all the documents that have been disclosed. So really, this, I think, amounts to a cover-up, and that's why we need a public inquiry to get to the truth of the matter, finally.
Okay. Miigwech, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for your interest.
After the break, we'll hear about an initiative that provides tuition-free access for some Ontario First Nation students. Welcome back. Students from 9 First Nation communities in Ontario now have access to tuition-free education at the University of Toronto. The Indigenous Tuition Initiative was announced in September and launched last week. It's meant to give Indigenous students better access to education. Shannon Simpson is the Senior Director of the Office of Indigenous Initiatives at the University of Toronto. She joins us now. Welcome to Nation to Nation.
Ani, hello everyone. Thank you for having me.
Why was this initiative created?
I think we've just had a lot of conversations over the years about reconciliation and about what U of T can do. And a lot of that has been really conversation based with a lot of significant changes that we've made, but we really wanted to do something that was a real concrete action. And I think this has been one of those real concrete actions to really show something significant that we can do.
What's been the response from the First Nations?
The communities I was able to reach out to right away as we were just sort of thinking about how this might come to be. And from the very first time I connected with them, they were very excited, very happy to be involved, happy to participate, really felt like it could make a significant impact on their communities. So we've had really overwhelmingly positive support from the communities.
What are some of the barriers Indigenous students face?
In terms of education, I mean, there's so many barriers that students have from a very young age in terms of access to education, in terms of content of curriculum, being seen, feeling like education is and post-secondary is a place where they should be. Toronto has its own additional set of barriers in terms of just the sheer size of the city and the cost to live here. So any of these barriers that we can help to break down and create pathways for, we're really trying to do to ensure that we can be a place that Indigenous students can call a home and be a welcoming environment.
How many students are currently taking advantage of this?
We have only just launched the process just over a week ago. So we only currently really knew about the students who were band funded from those 9 communities, and we don't know how many people are here that aren't band funded. The communities weren't able to know for sure. So we estimate that there will be around, from the 9 communities, we think right now there's probably around 50 students that are here at U of T. There could be more. We're just waiting to see. They still have another month or so to get their forms in to determine their eligibility, and then we'll have a better sense. And obviously, we hope it's going to grow from year to year.
Is there a maximum of students that will be accepted, and for how long will this initiative run?
There is no maximum. So as long as you're from one of the 9 communities included, you will be eligible, and we don't anticipate stopping this program. So it is happening from now and moving forward.
If it is successful, do you foresee expanding the number of communities to more than the initial 9?
I think that would really be our hope. That is some of the feedback. I would say overwhelmingly the response has been very positive, and the only questions we've had are kind of, what about my community, and how can more communities be included? So I really think that once we get this first year under our belts and see how things go, I really hope that we can expand it to include some more communities.
Do you know of any other post-secondary institutes in Canada if they've expressed interest in developing their own initiatives?
There are probably almost all the institutions are really taking a look at whether this is something their institutions can do or not. I know we all heard that Waterloo University announced something similar in the spring, which I think got a lot of institutions talking about, is this something we can do and how can we do it? So that's really our hope, is that more post-secondary institutions will also do something similar, so that it just really increases the options that students have for post-secondary.
Are you concerned at all about any backlash from non-Indigenous students or parents who may complain First Nations students already get too much free stuff?
I mean, I don't know that I'm concerned about that. I mean, that's always the possibility when something like this happens. I think that institutionally, U of T is committed to doing this, is proud that they're doing this, is proud that we're building and strengthening relationships with our communities. So I think if people do have a negative perception of it, it's just really demonstrating that they have more learning that they need to do. My office actually offers all the Indigenous training that is offered for students, staff, and faculty at U of T, so we can connect them to these resources to learn more, because I think often opinions like that are just based out of not really knowing or understanding.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Miigwech, thank you for joining us.
Miigwech.
That's it for tonight's episode of Nation to Nation. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you missed any part of the show, you can check out our podcast. Go to aptnnews.ca/podcast. Miigwech, and have a good night.